Good morning. For those who don't know me, my name is Billy McMillan. When I was 14, my dad became a preacher. But we lived on a farm, and the church was 2 hours away in Regina. So the farm was not done. So during the first year, the 8 of us would pile into the car early Sunday morning to take the trek to Regina and to spend the day. So we had one of those things you don't have anymore before SUVs. We called it the boat, really. I tried to find even what kind of car it was, and I can't even find it anymore. But it was a large vehicle, and we had a large family. So we had, my dad would sit in the front row. Beside him would be my youngest brother, Tim, then the baby, Harmony, and then my mom. And then in the back row, I sat behind my dad, and then my sister Heather, my sister Holly, and then Steve. There were 2 reasons it was set up like this. The first was that nobody wanted to sit beside Steve. And so Holly drew the short straw, and she had to sit beside him. The second reason was more personal to me. I sat behind my dad. That was a strategic position because when there were some behavior modification issues that needed to happen from the front row, he could not effectively get me. So we did that for a full year. We would drive to Regina in the morning. We'd be there by 9:30 or so that we get to Bible class at 10. And then we had, in those days, Sunday morning and Sunday night. And so Sunday night started at 6. And so there's a long period of time in there between 12 and 6 where what do you do with a family of 8? And so what happened was that families in the church took us home for dinner. And it was a fascinating and enjoyable time for the most part, but it was pretty nerve-wracking for a teenager like me and probably pretty nerve-wracking for our hosts. What are they going to feed us? And who had cable? And would they let me watch the football game in the afternoon? Thank you to Bud and Marlene, they had both of those things. I wondered lately about the pressure that those people felt to bring a family of 8 home to their house, find something that you could feed all of these children, and then what do you do with them in the afternoon? Once we moved to Regina, my mom then would rush home after church, and she would prepare a meal for who knows how many. She would have the 8 of us, and then there could be 2 people, 4 people, 6 people, 8 people. No idea how many more people would come. Whoever Dad brought along home with him. No idea. It's with some awe that I look back on those days and think, how did she handle that pressure? These days, it's my wife who does this in terms of having large groups of people, and it's her that I think of with awe. Yesterday morning, we had 20 people over for brunch. I've said before that words are tricky because words have no meaning except outside of a context. For example, when you hear Paul say, as Melissa read, practice hospitality, what do you feel inside? For some of you, you get excited. You love nothing more than making food for as many people as possible, for offering your home for events and activities. For other Christians, and fortunately still mostly women, the word hospitality incites feelings of burden and inadequacy and unfair expectations and just plain exhaustion. What if I don't like to cook or I'm not good at it? And it's so expensive, and I have kids and husbands who I'm constantly cleaning up after already. And the idea of more people coming to my house induces feelings of panic and anxiety. How many of you in the room today have some sort of allergy or intolerance to something? Yeah, look around. That doesn't help, does it? It makes it hard to feed people these days, right? And if you add to that the rising cost of food and people's preferences, it's no wonder that we feel anxious about the prospect of feeding people. In the old days, we just did this. We just brought Jell-O salad. Nope. Here's the thing. Nobody ever liked Jell-O salad. But that's what we ate. Yeah, so here's the thing. Food is and often can be an important element in our efforts to make connections. But when we make hospitality all about the preparation of food, whether it's having people stay in your home or making endless casseroles or salads for potlucks, I think what happens is that we miss what hospitality is really about. And this narrow understanding has caused many people to avoid hospitality altogether, believing that their homes or their cooking skills or their resources aren't good enough. And so what should have been a life-giving opportunity to welcome each other instead becomes an anxiety-inducing performance. Maybe you're sitting here today and you can identify with that feeling. You hear Paul say, practice hospitality, and your immediate reaction is, I don't want to make more food. I think we need to reclaim a fuller understanding of hospitality. The biblical concept of hospitality literally is love of strangers. It's a much richer theological idea than the narrow parameters we've put around it. For many ancient cultures, the obligation to welcome strangers was a core element of their society. We welcome strangers. That's what we do. But for our culture, though, that's not the case, is it? Strangers are people to be feared, to be avoided, to be deported. Our houses have become fortresses of privacy and escape and refuge from the busyness and pressure of our world. And so when we say hospitality, we think of hotels and restaurants. But that's not how the New Testament Christians thought of hospitality. Rosaria Butterfield has this quote that I thought was interesting. Radically ordinary hospitality turns strangers into neighbors, and then neighbors into family, and finally, by God's grace, family into the household of God. So what I want to do this morning, I hope, is to reclaim the practice of hospitality from both the professional industry of feeding and sheltering people, and also from the historical pressures that many of you have experienced. When we read Romans chapter 12, hospitality is presented there not as something that you occasionally do, but as the natural expression of what it means to live in Christian community. So, a few things I want to talk about. First of all, hospitality begins with God. Before we become hosts or hospitable people, we find ourselves as guests at God's table of grace. Paul begins the chapter like this: in view of God's mercy, and everything else after that is reliant on God's mercy. As Christine Pohl notes, hospitality is not first a duty and responsibility. It is first a response of love and gratitude for God's love and welcome to us. Think about how God's hospitality towards humanity forms the foundation of our faith. All the way back in creation, God created a home for humanity even before humans existed. In the incarnation, God makes room for humanity in his own divine life. Gregory of Nazianzus described the incarnation this way. He said, "For your sake, Jesus became a stranger in a strange land." And of course, in salvation, God welcomes us despite our unworthiness. Paul says earlier in Romans, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And as we have just experienced in communion, God continues to host us at the Lord's table, regardless of our status. Our capacity to welcome other people flows from first receiving God's welcome. And so the first step in reframing this idea of a hospitality in our minds is to change our perspective from hospitality as obligation to hospitality as a grateful response. We welcome others because we ourselves have been welcomed. Rosaria Butterfield again suggests that hospitality is the ground zero of the Christian life, the place where we prove that we understand what God has done for us. Do we truly believe that God loves us? Hospitality is one of the major ways we show it. We welcome other people in our lives as a response to God's own welcoming, His determination to change us from enemies to friends and more to family to bring us into His own household. Hospitality begins with God. Secondly, hospitality sees. Hospitality begins with truly seeing other people as they are and recognizing that they, first of all, just exist, that they are here. And we recognize their presence, their needs, their worth as fellow bearers of the image of God. Hospitality flows from understanding, as Paul has explained in the previous paragraph from what Melissa read, that we belong to each other. When we develop the ability to see and listen to other people clearly, we follow Jesus' example by seeing people that others overlooked. He saw the children, the sick, the women, the tax collectors, people who in that society had become invisible, the outcasts and the misfits. And he responded to the person that was there in front of him, seeing them as valuable, despite what society said about them. Miroslav Volf writes, "The will to give ourselves to others and to welcome them is prior to any judgment about others, except that of identifying them in their humanity. They are human, and so we welcome them. That is it." Will Gudara was the co-owner and general manager of a restaurant called 11 Madison Park in New York City. In 2017, that restaurant earned the #1 spot on the ranking of the world's best restaurants. So, as things happen like that, he wrote a book. And his book is called Unreasonable Hospitality. And he argues that the first part of unreasonable hospitality is just being present, actively listening and attentively observing, rather than asking, what is the minimum I can get away with here in this situation? When we see people as individuals and respond to their needs by exceeding expectations rather than cutting corners, we benefit from the powerful connections that result. In Gudara's case, this meant things like serving a hot dog on a fancy plate because a guest remarked they had missed out on the experience of a New York hot dog. It meant paying the parking meter while they were dining. It meant surprising a homesick guest with off-menu churros. So what might that look like for us? A couple suggestions. First of all, how about trying smiling? I assure you that it will not break your face. So for those of you, and there are some of you, I know, it's hard. But it is important. The first step in hospitality is just to smile at someone. And yes, hospitality is not just for strangers. You can be hospitable to your spouse and occasionally to your children and even to your parents. You can maintain eye contact so that you sustain a connection. You can learn names and stories of people that we regularly encounter, because hospitality sees. And then hospitality welcomes. True hospitality creates spaces where other people can belong without needing to change who they are. Verse 16 of chapter 12 says, "Live in harmony with one another. Don't be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position, and do not be conceited." Most of us know that experience of entering a new situation where you don't know the people. You don't know the expectations that surround a public or private gathering like the one we're in right now. I'm not going to do this justice, but when Diesta was a young university student, she and her friend attended a Sunday morning gathering. She had never been there before. She knew nobody there. But they found that they were accepted not by their own peers, the 20-somethings, of which there were several, but actually by the seniors who were sharing a meal in the basement. They were eager for them to join in, even though it bothered my wife that she had nothing to bring. As a 20-something at a new church, her new best friends were all in their 60s and 70s. And despite the hindrances of age, the feeling of being a stranger was overcome by hospitality. Our tendency, especially in Instagram age, is to equate hospitality with perfect homes, gourmet meals. But when we do that, we create unnecessary obstacles. Instead, welcoming can happen in simple settings where we offer coffee and cookies or soup and bread rather than elaborate meals, where we find alternate spaces where our homes are small, like parks or cafes or community rooms. Luke Brotherton writes, "Hospitality is engaging differences while maintaining Christian identity, fostering," and I like this phrase, "conversation without conquest. You don't have to win a chat." This involves creating what Christine Pohl calls free space. Free space is where authentic connection can happen without expectations that the other person will change to be like us, where a stranger can become a friend. Hospitality offers the privileges of community and family and friendship to those who don't expect it and those who haven't earned it. It offers insider status to outsiders. It spends time and energy on people who don't look like us, who don't dress like us, who don't talk like us, who don't eat like us. When we have this posture of welcome, then that extends beyond physical spaces to attitudes and relationships. So ultimately, hospitality is about making space for other people. And to do that, you need to have space in your own life. You need to have margin. In order to have space, we have to reject busyness. We have to create space and time intentionally in our schedules, both for our own rejuvenation, especially for those of us who are introverts, but also so that we can allow opportunities for other people to be welcomed into our lives. Because hospitality doesn't always come on a schedule, does it? Hospitality means that you are open to being interrupted. It means that we cannot be so busy or so consumed by our own lives that we have no space to respond to someone else's need. Because both the one giving and the one receiving hospitality are unique. And because of that, welcome hospitality will look differently for each of us. For some of us, hospitality will mean sitting quietly with someone, just content to be there with each other. For others, it might look like a raucous party full of loud and noisy games. So how do you know whether it's time to just sit or whether it's time to break out into song? You know the answer, don't you? You've got to listen. You've got to pay attention to the other person. We have to know them. in order to welcome them. Hospitality welcomes. Hospitality shares. Paul says, share with the Lord's people who are in need and practice hospitality. Unless you think that Paul is all on his own, Peter says similarly, show hospitality to each other without grumbling. That's the hard part. And as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another. You and I know that sharing is hard. You can watch toddlers with their toys just to know that. But adults don't find it easy to share either, do we? And sharing extends far beyond food to include our time, our attention, our money, and actually ourselves. Food may end up being the easy part of hospitality. Christianity is not a religion that can be done well by yourself. There are over 50 commands in the New Testament that emphasize this idea of one another, and we have about 8, I think, in this section that we're talking about today. Love one another, over 16 times. Serve one another. Be devoted to one another. Live in harmony with one another. Be devoted to one another. Honor one another above yourselves. Accept one another. Live in peace with each other, and it keeps going. The common thing is, though, that all of these commands require an other. The Christian walk doesn't work without commitment to the other. In an age of privacy and self-protection, sharing requires vulnerability. This movement that we're talking about from stranger to neighbor to family only happens through authentic sharing that creates relationship, and that's going to cost you. Christine Pohl acknowledges that most gracious hosts know that they will sometimes be used, but they provide welcome anyway. And so sharing in the 21st century might look like giving your time, giving your money, giving your tickets. Might mean opening your friend network or your professional network to other people. It may mean making your skills available to those who could benefit. It may just mean sharing your attention instead of looking at your phone. It might mean that you might have to share your spot in church. And I bet some of you who are good at this can think of way more ideas than I can. Some of us are pretty good at giving to others. Where we have more trouble sometimes is being on the receiving end of hospitality. Hospitality requires that we learn not just how to be good at being a host, but also how to be good hosts. At a basic level, of course, this just means not taking advantage of other people's willingness to help us. As the old saying goes, both fish and guests start to smell if they stay too long. My mother-in-law likes to tell this story about a couple who had well, I don't know if they are friends or just people, but they had some people over for supper, and after a few hours it appeared that they were not leaving. And so he got up and he said, well, Barb, let's go to bed so these nice people can go home. It's one of her favorite stories. And maybe the fact that she can tell it so often is a reminder to us of what it means to being a good guest. Some of us need to stop asking for people to serve us and to start giving of ourselves. In Luke chapter 10, Jesus sends out 72 of his disciples to preach and to heal. This is what he said to them. Do not take a purse or bag or sandals, and don't greet anyone on the road. When you enter a house, first say, peace to this house. And if someone who promotes peace is there, your peace will rest on them. If not, it will return to you. Stay there, eating and drinking whatever they give you, for the worker deserves his wages, and do not move around from house to house. When you enter a town and are welcomed, eat what is offered to you. Why do you have to say that twice? For someone who has has several specific delights, hello onions, this is difficult for me. To eat what is offered can be difficult. Basic politeness is certainly part of it, but at a deeper level, some of us aren't very good at receiving hospitality. We like to believe that we can handle our own issues. We don't need any help. And at some point, our obsession with self-sufficiency becomes its own idol, its own sin. Accepting other people's hospitality will break that obsession. For people whose sin required Jesus to die on a cross, we're often pretty eager to move on from any perceived weakness as soon as possible. But our need for God and for each other doesn't go away. And when we allow ourselves to receive the gifts of others, we were reminded that our self-sufficiency is a lie. We need each other. Like how Parker Palmer says it, to be welcomed as a guest is as much an act of hospitality as to welcome someone into your home. Both require vulnerability and openness. Hospitality shares, and finally, hospitality transforms. Do not be overcome by evil, Paul says, but overcome evil with good. Hospitality becomes a form of peacemaking when we welcome those people who even society and our own hearts designate as enemies. Henry Nouwen said it like this: hospitality means primarily the creation of free space where the stranger can enter and become a friend instead of an enemy. Hospitality is not about changing people, but offering them space where change can take place. And if we as a church can practice the discipline of hospitality, remarkable things can happen. Big ideas. Reconciliation can become possible because people across divides are welcomed. Communities are renewed through cultures of belonging and mutual care. Prejudices dissolve through ongoing relationship with those who are different from us, and people find themselves coming home. The call to hospitality is ultimately a call to reflect the character of God who has welcomed us through Jesus. As Julian Caron notes, hospitality is actually a miracle in our individualistic world. It seems like something we should just take for granted. But opening the door of our home and letting someone in rather than being normal is so exceptional that when it happens, everyone is amazed. If we could reclaim hospitality as a posture, as a readiness to create room, to make space in our lives, rather than a performance, then we could liberate ourselves and others to experience the transformative power of what it means to welcome. Hospitality can become not just what we occasionally do, but who we fundamentally are, people who are shaped by God's welcome and extend that same welcome to others. So, some things to think about. That's not at all right. How about that? So, I don't know where it is, but let's ask ourselves in our own heart, where is God inviting me to practice hospitality? And I'm not just talking about the way you share your home, but how you share your time, your resources, your connections, your insider status with those who are on the outside. For the last couple of months, we've been asking you to consider inviting someone to come home to the church. We've been trying to work hard at making our physical space welcoming. The bathrooms are not obnoxious anymore. You can read the screens. You could sit on chairs that are clean in the gym. But more importantly, we're trying to become the kind of people who are welcoming. So this is the week. This is the good opportunity for you as we celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus. Once again, who's on your list? Who have you been praying for? Consider inviting them for a walk or a conversation over coffee or taking them out for lunch after their visit with you on Friday or Sunday. Make yourself uniquely available to them this week so that you can listen and see where God is working in their hearts, where you can pay attention to the needs that you are uniquely positioned to respond to. Second, how might you create space for genuine relationship with the people around you this week? How might you open your heart to the possibility of connection? And I say open because this might involve crossing social boundaries, economic boundaries, cultural boundaries, maybe ideological boundaries that typically separate us. I invite you to examine your schedule. Is there space in it for other people to interrupt you? If there isn't, where do you need to slow down? What things do you need to stop doing? And for you introverts, where do you need to implement time for solitude and silence so that you can be someone who is hospitable? And finally, what's one simple, sustainable practice of welcome that you can commit to this week? You don't need to have 20 people over for dinner. What we need to remember is that radically ordinary hospitality often involves small, consistent acts rather than grand gestures. So this morning, smile at someone. Invite them into a conversation that you are having with someone else, into a conversation that perhaps that goes beyond, how are you? Who, when you look around you this morning, is someone that you thought, boy, I'd kind of like to get to know them. I'd like to either at least know their name, maybe know their story. You've seen them week after week, but you don't know who they are. Maybe today is an opportunity for that. As we approach this important week in our church calendar, would you commit to a couple things? Would you commit to coming on time? Would you commit to maybe even coming early? This Friday, we're starting at 10. This Sunday, we start as normal at 9:30. Maybe you could come a little bit early and help prepare the welcome for our guests. Maybe you could help Bud by moving up a row or two from your usual seat to allow people to feel more comfortable in our space. Maybe you could come early. Maybe you could buy a free coffee for someone from the Fireside Cafe. Maybe you could engage them in a conversation, or perhaps rather than coming early, maybe you could intentionally decide to stay late and notice people who are lingering, who are looking for connection, but there is no one connecting. And so this is our invitation this morning, to join in the work of the one who says, "Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I'll come in and eat with that person and they with me." May we too be people who are known as the people of the open door. May our homes and our hearts and our public worship space be our own expression of what God's original invitation is, to come home. Our invitation is to allow radically ordinary hospitality to turn strangers into neighbors, neighbors into family, and finally, by God's grace, family into the household of God.